Video 1. What is colonialism? Hi everybody. When we talk about globalization, we usually talk about things that happened in the 20th century and continue to happen in the 21st century. However, you could argue that globalization started much earlier. In fact, since the beginning of human history, people from different civilizations and cultures were in contact with each other, even traveled very far distances over long periods. People in the ancient world traveled widely and created trade networks. Very few locations were ever totally isolated. Still, trade, travel, and communications were slow throughout the ancient and medieval world. Furthermore, two parts of the world were almost totally unknown to each other. I mean, Europe, Africa, Asia, known as the Old World, and the Americas, known as the New World. We would be so it would be difficult to talk about globalism before Europeans reached the Americas. We will we really start to move to a more globalized world when Europeans reach what they call the New World in 1492. Ships led by Columbus reached islands connected to the Americas, and kind uh, and that and that created a new era in world history. It began it began the period in the in the began it began the period in which Europe connected itself to other sides of the world, to the Americas. It was also the beginning of European colonialism, the subject of our class today. The connection with the Americas changed Europe in many ways. Just one example, it introduced corn, potatoes, and tomatoes to the European diets. Whenever you have fries with ketchup, you are enjoying the results of this first push for a global world. Colonialism also brought a lot of wealth into Europe, which in turn fueled the economy and enabled the Industrial Revolution and modernization. For the original inhabitants of the Americas and many other regions of the world, it was colonialism. For the original inhabitants of the Americas and many other regions of the world, colonialism was destructive because of European military ruthlessness and the import of disease for which they had no immunity. What is colonialism, though? When of a group of people it also changed the new world completely, turning it into something different from what the Native Americans and other inhabitants of the colonized regions knew. What is colonialism, though? When a group of people, a state, a nation, uses territories from beyond its borders to increase its power and create opportunities for profit. The control can be direct or through agents, through local agents. It sometimes, but not always, includes settlers. Like nationalism that we discussed in the previous unit, colonialism is deeply connected with capitalism and the drive to make money. It is not quite the same as just conquest because the new territories are not continuous with the controlling country. They don't share a border with the controlling country. They are rather overseas. Most colonialism, therefore, was done by people from one ethnic group, Europeans, against or over all the other races and ethnic groups in the world. Another word for this policy of colonialism is imperialism. Though some may see differences between these two words, for us it does not matter. There are a number of types of colonialism. In order to give a wider picture of what colonialism is, I will describe a number of these types. Settler colonialism is the one that's, I think, most associated with the term colonialism. In settler colonialism, new populations immigrate to the new territory with the intention of living there permanently, settling there, becoming settlers. They will often expel or exploit the people who live there already. They will often keep their own culture and try to maintain their way of life like they had in the old country. This is often symbolized by naming the new place after a place in Europe. So there's a region in North America called New England, named after England. The city of New York, it was also known as New Amsterdam before then, is named after York. The settlers basically build a new European country or a new European nation on the land that used to belong to non-European people. Examples are the northern colonies in North America, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, all colonies that used to belong to England. Something similar but not identical happens in plantation colonialism. The point of a plantation colony is to grow plants that won't grow in Europe, like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. The number of Europeans in such colonies is usually small, but these few Europeans control big chunks of the land, big farms, big plantations. Most of the work, the labor, is carried out the work is carried out by locals or by enslaved people that were brought from other parts of the world. The slave trade was feeding these colonies. These kinds of places, the exploitation and cruelty of colonialism is often very visible. Examples include Caribbean islands and some southern colonies of the United States. Extraction colonialism is about taking raw material from distant lands. Usually, European traders use local agents to collect the raw material and natural resources and buy them for cheap European products. They use European superiority in production to get more raw material. So in North America, most of the hunting for fur was done by the local Native American population for a very long time. But it was done for the benefit and profit of Europeans. And they allowed it and they used the local population as long as it was suitable for them. This type of colonialism is often destructive to local nature because there's suddenly more need for resources than there ever was, and the local way of life because people turn their attention to the resource that the Europeans are interested in and tend to forget about the kind of occupations that sustain their life for the long run. It is most cruel when the resource that is needed are human beings who become enslaved, as was the case in Africa. A softer form of this kind of colonialism, or a different form, is trade colonialism. In this case, Europeans forced non-Western countries to trade with them under unfavorable conditions and against their will, against the ruler's will. They make money through trade that is backed up by military power. This was the case, for instance, in China in the 19th century. Finally, I will mention protectorate colonialism, where the foreign power controls the territory through local rulers who are much more loyal to the colonial power who keeps them in place than to the local population or local interest. In this case, if you walk around in that colonized country, you may not see many Europeans at all. You might not notice that this is under foreign control, but the European power, but the colonial power to exploit the territory and the people there is still very strong. I want to stress that not all forms of colonialism, also known as imperialism, are as visible as others. Trade colonialism or protectorate are not as obvious as are, are not as obvious as plantation colonialism, where you see a few Europeans controlling vast plantations with thousands of slaves on them. Remembering that not all colonialism is as visible as some of the pictures that we have from history books is important, because while direct colonialism is not as common today as it was 200 years ago, things like trade colonialism backed up by implicit threats of violence still exist in our world. Still, in the 19th century, the height of European colonial control, it was very visible. And so was the also visible was cruelty and unfairness of the colonial situation. People need People needed to justify it. In the next video, I will ask, how did Europeans justify their exploitation of the rest of the world?